the dread, where does that come from? Is it because you're like, shit, this is actually really real? And like, now we have to face this. And, we're either crazy together.
I didn't think we were crazy together. The dread was I was right. And all these really scary, big things were happening.
Welcome to the Freedom CEO podcast. It's about becoming the chief decision maker over your life in order to step into a life of freedom. From business, health, wealth, charity, and giving back to just doing life on your own terms. I am your host, Shay Invidiata. I am an award-winning activist, change maker, and a multifaceted impact entrepreneur with over a decade of experience in business, philanthropy, and health and wellness. In this space, I'm going to be bringing you insights, not just from me, but from incredible thought leaders around the globe to help you start making decisions towards living a life of freedom so you can live a life you love. Are you ready, guys? Because we are going all in. Karla Joy Treadway is a self-mastery coach and freedom-minded entrepreneur. She's been in the coaching and transformational workspace for 2 decades. In 2020, she closed her thriving brick-and-mortar yoga studio and moved her family to their island property in northern Western Ontario. She rebuilt herself online stronger than ever and started taking a loud, bold stand against the mandates, lockdowns, and government overreach. Today, she helps other freedom-minded entrepreneurs build practices of self-mastery and matrix-free businesses so they too can pivot themselves and their business to handle the uncertainty of the world. So as you know, you're tuning into the Freedom CEO podcast. And when I heard about the Sovereign CEO, I said, she's got to come on the podcast. So I am so grateful and excited to welcome, now I have actually met her in person, my friend Karla Treadway. Welcome to the Freedom CEO podcast, girl.
Thanks for having me, Shay. Yeah, my sister from another mother. It doesn't quite have that name rhyme, but you get what I'm saying.
I do. I mean, it's so crazy because it's such a unique phrase. And so like when I first heard of you as a sovereign CEO, I'm like, who is this woman? Tell me more. And then finding out as well that you were at the time interested, you were contemplating removing your implants, which of course, as you know, I removed mine in March of 2022. So I just kept feeling like we have more and more in common. She's also a badass freedom fighter and is very awake to what's happening in our world. And so we're going to go through it today. Like we're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about anchoring in. We're going to talk about business and the more how we can free ourselves. For those who don't know you though, let's just dive into a little bit of your background and your story, which I had the pleasure of hearing wholeheartedly a couple weekends ago. So share with us, a bit of your journey.
For sure. So I'm a life and business coach. I'm a yoga teacher. I'm a digital marketer. And I used to have a brick and mortar yoga studio, which I closed in 2020 due to never-ending nonsense, lockdowns, and mandates. I was super sleepy in the beginning. I was following all the rules. I was making sourdough at home and listening to CBC. I actually went out and got one jab. I was just fully trusting of everything I was being told. And something kind of rattled me eventually, thank God. And I kind of came to my senses. I closed my business because I just saw that lockdowns were relentless. And I'm in Ontario. I think we were locked down on and off for what felt like 18 months. I don't know what the actual number was, but it absolutely crushed my business in no time at all, like almost immediately. When you're paying bills on a building, and I had 16 staff at that point, I had a lot of bills to pay, and it just deteriorated my bank account in no time. And then even when we could open, people were terrified of one another. They were terrified to come in. And my business involved gathering large groups of people together to sweat and breathe. I did a ton of hands-on assisting, a ton of touching bodies, a ton of breath work. I remember at one point, it was recommended that yoga studios don't ohm because of the extended exhale, like such ridiculous rules. I actually closed the studio before I woke up. I just knew that I didn't want to be bankrupt and I didn't want to fall prey to these rules anymore. And I rebuilt myself online. And then when I actually woke up, I started speaking out against mandates. And in the beginning, Shay, I didn't even really say anything that bad. I think I said something like, I think we should just respect other people's choices. I played it pretty safe. And like that was the thing that got me canceled. Every single client, customer, my closest friends, everyone abandoned me. Every single Instagram follower that I had, everything poof, gone. So I feel like I lost my business 2 times. And I kind of sat at the bottom and thought, well, at least I have my integrity. That will have to do. Just me and integrity and the big man upstairs. Until one day there was just one little message in my DMs that said, me too. And then another, and then another. And in no time at all, I had more support than I've ever had in my entire life. And I just rolled with it. I started speaking out more and more. I volunteered for different political organizations. I did stuff locally. I helped the truckers. I worked for a documentary team. I basically spent an entire year not working and just freedom fighting. And I'm really grateful that I did do that. I honestly didn't have the mental capacity to work at that time. It was just so important to me to go all in. But eventually I needed to break that. And the moment for me was when I was working for the documentary team and I watched peaceful protesters who were praying and holding hands get beaten by the Canadian police. And when I watched that, I was privy to like thousands of hours of footage. I thought, this is happening. This is happening. So there's no point in resisting it. I'm not saying don't fight against it, but only being in the resistance doesn't really make sense anymore. This thing is going to play out how it's going to play out at this point. And there's only one other option right now, which is get back to work. Get back to work, make yourself stronger. Because as grateful as I was to be able to be in a position where I could just volunteer, my husband was like, go for it. Like, you go do it. I'll pay the bills. It also wasn't good for me, to always be protesting, to be in the resistance, to always be on social media. That was my job for the documentary, running their accounts. I needed to break away from that and make the conscious decision to not just be in the resistance, but to focus on strengthening myself and moving forward.
Totally. I mean, what a journey for you, having, like you said, having a brick and mortar, literally shutting it down, going in to fight. And at the same time, knowing you have to create something new for yourself and reinventing. Do you recall what was the moment for you? Because you mentioned you weren't always awake, and then you had, usually something happens, and sometimes it's an accumulation of enough pieces coming together. Mm-hmm. But can you recall that defining moment where you shifted from being sleepy, to use your words, to being awake?
There were several, in the beginning when I would see people with their videos talking about freedom, this is what I thought. I'm sorry, everyone. I thought, like, how privileged of you. Like, you think your freedoms are being taken away. I actually thought that, in Canada, we're just trusting of our media. It's the number one problem. Yeah. So what woke me up is one of my very good friends. She's she's a businesswoman. She's a yoga teacher. She's very, very smart. She started to lose her mind. And I thought, my poor friend, I'll help her. So I started like talking with her, like wondering why she was freaking out about everything, why she was so stressed out. And, you know, she just kept on asking me questions that I didn't have answers for. Just really, really smart questions, never telling me anything, just asking me questions that I could not answer. And, you know, anyone that's bought into the narrative, they just say, you know, shut up. That's why. It just like it is what it is. We just have to follow them. We have to trust them. She sent me some documentaries. I watched them. I was like, nah, I don't really believe it. And I think the moment was when my kids came home from school and said that the health unit was coming into school and saying that they didn't need parental permission to get a vaccine. And I thought something like fried in my brain. And I thought, I've signed 16 permission slips at this point for everything from can they watch a movie at school to can they walk down the block? Can they eat a cupcake? But someone can go and give my child an injection without permission. That is the thing that I think really set me off. And I actually spent that entire weekend. It was in the fall. My husband was hunting. I spent the whole weekend in a dark hole of conspiracy theories. I watched every documentary. I looked at everything. And by the time my poor husband came home, I like sat him down. I was sobbing and I was like, I need to tell you something. And he thought I was crazy. Like he knew all of this was a crock of shit from the beginning, but not because he was conspiratorial or had watched documentaries. He's just very, very logical. So the numbers didn't make sense. Right. But when I tried to tell him what I had just learned, he was like, now you're crazy. So now I had to do to him what my friend did to me, just like chip away and chip away. And I remember the worst moment of my life was when we were sitting outside in the hot tub and he said, you're right. Like all of it. This is what's happening. And I just felt this sense of like dread and panic come over me. And this was at the time when they were building detention facilities, when there were parents getting caught up in litigation with their kids. I thought they were going to take my kids away from me. I thought they were going to lock me up. And that's not a crazy thought because that's what they said. When the prime minister was on TV saying, how long will we tolerate these people? When my best friends in the world said, I can't tolerate people like you. All I could think about was all the history books that I had read. And it was not crazy to think that because they said, this is what we're going to do. They literally were building detention facilities. That was a scary time.
And I mean, in some ways, it still is a scary time because they've built them, but they haven't used them, which is a whole other conversation. But I think is important to point out that usually governments, people don't build something that they don't intend on using at some point. So very similar. That for me was also a defining moment of going, okay, Canada is probably not for me where I want to be long term. You know, that I remember that for me of going, the moment I heard that, and then also talking about UBI, Universal Basic Income, I'm like, the moment they talk about that, I'm out, which was in February of 2021 that Trudeau started talking about that. I said to my parent, and I had just come back from Costa Rica at that point too, to start scouting for property. And then, as you know, I left in September of that same year because I was like, there needs to be a plan B for me outside of this country. So wild. Okay. So you had this, it's interesting because you're saying that you had this dread in the hot tub kind of come over you, where some people would feel, I'm sure you were relieved in some way that like your husband was seeing what you were seeing But the dread, where does that come from? Is it because you're like, shit, this is actually really real? And like, now we have to face this. And, we're either crazy together, like, right?
I didn't think we were crazy together. It was, the dread was, I was right. And all these really scary, big things were happening. And we live a very sovereign lifestyle. We live on an island. We're not off the grid, but we easily could be. I'm basically married to Survivor Man. He could do he could build a hut and skin a wolf. Like we're good. We have 5 freezers of moose meat. We have our own plane. Like we're good. But I think that sense of dread, the things that I was worried about were them coming to take property. Because a lot of the things that I was learning was about that. It was taking back property. So not only people's freedoms were being taken away, but people's actual physical things were being taken away. And I think that was that sense of dread. Right. Thinking, I thought we were all set up. Do we have to leave? Do we have to go somewhere? And that stuff kind of still is on the table when you see our current government basically bankrupting all of its citizens. I saw that the average debt for each Canadian citizen right now is $742,000.
Holy.
That is the debt that we carry.
$742,000. Wow.
That's right. And I think at that time when I was like in the middle of the doom, I was thinking there would be like a physical takedown, like they would physically take people off their property. I was like so scared at that time. It's much more practical than that. It's pretty easy to take property away from people when life is unaffordable. All you have to do is jack up the interest rates to get people off of their land. It's really not hard at all. And there are very few people that are in a place where they can handle a doubling of their basic expenditures each month.
Absolutely. I mean, interest rates is definitely a great method. Again, also tied with the inflation, right? You make the cost of living in that area on top of the the interest rate increase. And all of a sudden, a city, a town becomes very unaffordable. Burning a place is also a really other easy way to get people off their land. And we're seeing this, in my opinion, all across the world, not just in BC and places like Kelowna or on Hawaii and Maui, but there's bizarre fires turning on at the same time across the world that, is a more easy way to make people believe that it's something natural when it comes by the way of a fire versus an interest rate hike, inflation increasing. So you're right, very right on that. So let me ask you, because I don't even know this about you. You guys were on the island prior to 2020, or did you guys move on the island since 2020?
We always just lived here in the summertime. It was always just meant to be a summertime cottage. And then for like 15 years, we would go in between BC and Ontario in the summer. We've been in Kenora, where I am, for a few years now, but we would always rent mainland places. My kids still go to the school system. Yuck, they're still in there. And then when I closed my business, though, and everybody was losing their mind, I thought, let's get out of here. And it's something I never would have wanted to do in the past. I would have thought that it was too isolating. I would have thought that's too hard to live in that way. It's very, very cold where I live. It gets to like -40 in the wintertime. But we packed it up and moved down here. We had to make some changes to our home. We had to put some new heating systems in. But we've been here, I guess, since 2020, all year long. So I say that I drive everything but a car. We drive boats and Sea-Doos, airplanes, snowmobiles. We do drive cars in the wintertime once the lake is frozen. It's basically like a luxurious 6-lane highway in the wintertime. And the old me that wouldn't have liked it being isolating loves the fact that it's isolating. I love not participating in the clown world. I want nothing to do with it now. My kids boat themselves to school. When the weather is nice, they snowmobile in the wintertime. And I get to live separate from the clown world as much as I want. And we're not far. We're like 10 minutes from town. It's not super far, but it's enough that I can separate myself from all of it.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love that. And it sounds like your husband already had these very necessary and needed skills for a world that we are all living in and questioning more and more about. Never thought, do you want the Gucci bag or do you want chickens? You're like, I want the chickens,
Right.
Is both possible? Can we put the chicken in the Gucci bag? Is that possible? And, how many memes, you're the meme queen, of course, of that you've seen around the old days of like looking for a husband who had the house and the cars, when I'm like, girl, you don't need a husband to do that. You should be providing that yourself. But those memes that have, the guy who's doing that versus the rancher who like knows how to round up the cows and call in the cattle. And how many of us now are like, that's actually what I want. And Karla already was one of those.
Right? Like I used to look at how the Mennonites live or how the Amish live and think like, that's weird. Yes. And how's this for foreshadowing? My in-laws, Dan's parents, were on one of Canada's first reality TV shows ever made. It was called Pioneer Quest. Fun. And they had to live like pioneers from the 1800s in the Manitoba wilderness for a year with only supplies that you'd have in the 1800s. So they had to build a home, they made straw beds, they had to plow fields and keep livestock alive. And that was just like not something that I was super interested in when I was younger. If Dan's mom ever made comments about me being like a nice little Mennonite wife, I would have said like, heck no. And now I'm like, show me how to do that. I need to know how to do those things.
That is crazy. Okay. And how old was Dan? How old was your husband when his parents went on the show to do this?
He was 17 or 18 years old. And wow. He had to basically take control of their entire life. Like they signed over their construction business. He was in charge of his younger brothers for an entire year. I think it made him grow up really quickly, actually.
Totally. And okay, so like, I mean, he's been, talk about foreshadowing, but like the training wheels have been on, they've been set. You guys are completely good on that front where, more people like myself, I'm like, okay, I got to learn how to milk goats and, doing all that stuff. So, I think like many people, right, going through the last few years that we have and trying to navigate in this new space, regardless of what your belief system is, we're all needing to reinvent the way that we do most things. We need money in order to function in this current society. You and I both share a very same belief that money is just an energy exchange, and we could have a whole conversation on just how you view money and how that your relationship with money can change your entire life. But let's talk about business first. Around what did you do? What are you doing? And like, what are you advising people right now, regardless of what side of the belief system they could be on? Like, how are you looking at navigating business different these days?
Well, I think money is the most practical thing to increase your freedom. So like I live rurally and people look at that and they think, oh, must be nice. I hate that conversation, must be nice. But I don't think it's the end all be all. Like, look at the fires. Look at, like, what if they did come and take things away from you? So we can set ourselves up externally and think that we're good to go, but we just really don't know what the future holds. So money is really practical. Money is something that we all need to be focused on, whether we have money issues or thoughts about that or not. Like, we just have to. We all need more money right now. So in the beginning, I made a container that was called Just the Sovereign. And it was in the middle of this crisis. And the Sovereign at that time was, here's everything that you might need to live free. So I brought in my skills, like mental health practices. I brought in physical health practices. I brought in business coaching. And then I brought all kinds of experts in to talk about homesteading and food preparedness and medical preparedness. It literally was, here's everything. Right. But eventually I got to the point where I noticed most people in here live in a city. Most people aren't in a place where they can go move to the country as much as they would like to. Most people can't do that. And when it comes to preparedness, a lot of the preparedness things we can honestly get done in a weekend. You could build up your pantry, you could buy a generator, you could get a medical kit. Like, there's no reason that anyone should be sitting on that stuff for years and years. I eventually refined my container to be the Sovereign CEO and focus on the two things that I think people need the most right now. One is mindset, and the other is a freedom lifestyle by way of making a digital business. I was really victim to lockdowns and mandates by having a physical brick and mortar business. So going online and creating a radically authentic personal brand, my business now is 10 times more profitable, impactful, and enjoyable than it ever was when I ran a physical studio. And I think that's really important, not just the money piece, but the enjoyment piece. You know, I wake up every day early, like 5 a.m., and I'm genuinely excited to get to work because I have monetized my clear calling. You know, I'm doing work that I actually love because I'm radically honest online. I'm working with people that are aligned with my values. The people that I work with are super fun. And I help people do what I did. I help people build online businesses. And you know what? Most entrepreneurs fail. And I think the reason that most entrepreneurs fail is because they don't have self-mastery. You know, they're trying to focus on mastering their mission, mastering their business, but they're not disciplined. They have these stories that tank them every day. They have these personal narratives that tell them that they can't do something. They get emotionally triggered all day long. If you're not working on those things, you will not survive as an entrepreneur. Because it's hard. Yeah. It is hard. So we do both in that container. How do I help you stay steady? How do I help you create emotional resilience? How do you handle uncertainty, rejection, failure? Because this world, Jay, it has an obsession with comfort, an obsession with emotional safety, an obsession with, you know, just never failing. And you got to make it right with those things if you actually want to be successful at business. I mean, you know what it takes to actually be successful. There's risk involved. There's putting yourself out there. Yeah. So that's what I help people do, mindset and business.
Conversations like this just light me up. And I hope you're loving today's episode too. My friend, can I ask a quick favor of you? Could you please hit the subscribe or follow button? You have no idea how much that helps this show grow. So discussions like this can reach others as well. And if you want to go the extra mile, please leave a review. Your thoughts and feedback mean so much to me. After all, this show is created for you. Okay, that's it. Let's get back to it. You know, I think the other key component to what you're doing, if I can just add, is the accountability and community piece. Because for most, the entrepreneur world is really the solopreneur, right? Until even sometimes like within your own team, right? Like you can build up and you have your own team, you've got an admin, you have a VA, maybe you have a marketing person. But it's not the same as being in a room, being in an online container with other like-minded entrepreneurs, because the mindset of an entrepreneur, the way that, not even the mindset, but just how that the brain calibrates compared to a VA, very different, very different. And so it's like that energy exchange of being in a group, being in a space with other like-minded people that energizes you. But then there's also that accountability that like you actually follow through on what you say you're going to do and keeping your promises to yourself, but you've got that container, which I'm sure you do that within your group as well.
100%. Everyone in the container is awake. And when it comes down to accountability, a big part of that is money. So I have the Sovereign CEO, which is a really accessible membership, but then I also do one-on-ones and I run a mastermind. And those things will get you ahead faster every time, because when you pony up, when you invest in yourself, it puts some necessary heat on yourself so that you become accountable to you. You know, there are amazing free programs out there. There really are. But I know any massive leap that I've taken in my business has been after I did something that scared the crap out of me. When I hired a coach, when I joined a mastermind, when I hired a really expensive employee, like whatever it is, when I put my money where my mouth is, I start showing up different and I start being accountable to myself.
Totally. Well, because you've got skin in the game, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the game changer. When you have skin in the game, you feel it a lot more versus if you're not paying for something and it's free. Like, why you could show up, great, but if you don't show up, like you don't feel it. It's not the same. So having that skin in the game definitely pushes you to to show up from the accountability side. So
yeah,
go ahead.
I'm sure you see it in realty as well. There's a lot of people that like the idea of becoming an entrepreneur, but they're just kind of playing games. You know, my best friend is a realtor and she kicks ass, and I see what it takes to like get to the top. Like she is working. And then I have other friends that are realtors that just kind of wait for a call to come in every now and then. They're not making any money. And it's the same with digital entrepreneurship. I've been in so many coaching containers. I see the same thing again and again. There's a lot of people playing entrepreneur. They're making their Instagram account. They're playing on Canva. It feels like work because it's taken a lot of time, but they're not doing the real things to actually grow a business. So I like to put like some honesty and some heat on that, like what actually is real work, quotations, and what is playing games, because a lot of people are playing games and that's why they're not reaching those heights and getting to those places that they want to be.
I love that. It's true. And if you don't follow Karla, make sure you follow her on Instagram. Her information is going to be in the show notes. And also, of course, if you are tuning in watching, it's also been coming up on the screen on the bottom, because you consistently actually speak to that. And we all know there's many influencers on Instagram with huge followings that are making no money because they actually haven't developed the skill to monetize their own value. It's not even about their audience. It's monetizing their own value. So I think I love that you brought that up, because I've watched you talk about that on social as well.
Yeah.
Also, as a side, I also realized that your bestie over there is also somebody I've worked with in real estate for over 10 years. So we just made that connection this week, which is also pretty cool. And that's, the world's small, 6 degrees of separation. But you also just know that's like, you're like, yeah, you're good people, good people.
I was
always
trying to think how we got connected, and we only figured out our that we were both friends with Dana like very recently, but I was trying to figure out how did Shay and I even get acquainted? Like I knew you were friends with Sarah and I'd been to some calls with you, but it was the Explant. Like I must have seen you with Sarah, heard you talk about it. And I sent you some DMs, and you were kind enough to give me so much information and help me along that journey. That's where all of this started. So thank you for that, because that was really important to have women, even women who were total strangers, help me through that journey and just say, like, you can do it. You're going to be fine.
Yeah. Well, my pleasure. And I say to all women always that my DMs are always open for those conversations. I think it was the simplest, hardest decision I've ever had to make in my life. And at the time, I thought that was going to be the hardest decision, was actually making that decision. And for me personally, on the other side of explanting, it wasn't any easier. It wasn't necessarily harder, but it was still hard. And there were days that were harder, and so because of my own experience and also the impact that it has on women's health and how it's not spoken about enough by women in general, and even like men, it's part of why I actually vocally share my stories, because I really believe more men need to hear what's happening to women, not realizing that the detrimental effects it can have on the female body and how that actually affects their relationship can actually affect their children as well, if they have children with their partner. And I think if more men started to realize that we're actually poisoning and killing our women, maybe there'd be a culture shift at some point around it, And so, that is what connected us, truthfully. And I remember writing you back. I actually remember sending you a voice note back being like, I looked at your Instagram because I didn't follow you at the time. And I was trying to do the thread. I'm like, how do I know her? I'm like, she's a freedom fighter. She's friends with Sarah. Have I been in something with you before? And so let's talk about that for a moment, because like I said, I think that's important. So how long did you have your implants for? And did you have symptoms around that? And like, what drove you to make the decision?
I got mine when I was 21. I was in a very different place, just partying, not a care in the world. Probably wouldn't have made a different decision even if you had told me that they weren't good for you. No one told me that they weren't good for me at that time, but I can't say I would have made a different decision, to be honest, like at 21, just on a different program. I have a whole host of symptoms, but I'm only 4 weeks post-surgery now. So it's kind of hard to say what has shifted or what will. But I ended up developing capsular contraction on my left breast, and I got them replaced, I think 6 years ago. I just kind of left the contracture for a couple of years. Didn't really think anything of it other than that was just scar tissue. Got them replaced 6 years ago. Actually wanted to explant then, but I was too scared what I was going to look like. So I downsized and thought that that issue would be resolved. I didn't think that it was an autoimmune thing. I just thought that that was just something that happened, and it was super rare. They'll tell you it's super rare. It's not. Getting capsular contraction is something that many, many women experience. They just don't tell their surgeons. I didn't tell my surgeon at the time. I Googled it, saw what it was, didn't deal with it. Many, many women will experience that and just not report it or say anything. Got my second set, almost immediately got capsular contraction again. Started fighting it, tried to massage it, tried to deal with it. It looked fine, so I was ignoring it, but it hurt. And that pain was getting worse and worse and worse. So I knew they needed to come out eventually, but I didn't want to deal with it because they looked fine. I didn't honestly believe BII. I would hear about it. I don't know why. I think it's because the symptoms are usually pretty general. Like the rashes and stuff are pretty obvious, but a lot of the BII symptoms are things like I'm tired, brain fog, weight gain, and I'm 38 now. So hearing that list of symptoms, I was like, isn't that everybody like at this age? Inflammation, it was just so vague. But I got mine out because I felt like the voice of God came thundering into me one day, and it said, get them out and as fast as humanly possible. And that second piece was so clear, as fast as humanly possible. So that's when I started contacting you and diving into the information and thinking maybe breast implant illness. I started noticing reports about there being cancer cells found in the scar tissue forming around them. It started to become more and more clear that these things were very unhealthy to have in my body. And it wasn't just a scar tissue thing, that it was an immune thing, that it was a cancerous thing. And that pain, I was so grateful for the pain, because the pain, every time I felt that little pang, that little nerve twitch, it reminded me that they needed to come out no matter what. And I was experiencing weight gain, lots of inflammation, gut issues, crazy brain fog, to the point where my kids would look at me and say, like, what did you just say? Like, what was that word you just said? Like, that's not right. I was messing up my sentences. So I booked in, and at one point I even tried to postpone it because it was summer. It wasn't really convenient. I wouldn't be able to swim. And that voice came thundering back that said, as soon as possible. So I got in as soon as I could. I did a lot of work leading up to that. I worked with my coach. I worked with a therapist. I thought emotionally I was going to be a wreck, and physically would be no big deal. After doing all the mindset work, emotionally, I was 100%. I was really at peace going into it. I think what was triggering me was when you look at all the BII resources, you start to see a lot of scary pictures. So I thought aesthetically things were going to be not good. But I think, like, I know that all the mindset work that I did going into this, I think no matter what the aesthetic outcome was, I think I would have been okay. Lucky for me, I am totally happy with the aesthetic outcome. There's scars and all the things, and they're definitely not perfect, but I am so happy with how they look. And I would have been okay if they weren't. Physically though, it's intense. Getting them in was no big deal. No big deal. Getting them out's been pretty intense. I still definitely am recovering. I'm super sore. I can't put my arms above my head. I'm having weird detox symptoms like headaches and rashes and weird things coming up that I never get. But one positive side effect that I have noticed right away is my thinking. It's crystal clear. I'm not forgetting anything. I'm not stumbling my words. I have tons of energy. I feel the way that I do when I've taken ADHD meds in the past, which I don't do anymore. I feel like I'm on ADHD meds, just like tons of energy, crystal clear, on fire. I'm noticing that right away. And I'm sure I'm going to experience so many more benefits as I continue to heal.
Oh, big time. Big time. And I'm so grateful for you sharing, because, you know, even just your experience is different than mine and is going to be different from the next woman's. And I think this is why it's so important that those who are comfortable to share, you know, that we are talking about this. And I just saw Karla at the MYM, which is the Monetize Your Mind conference out in Alberta a couple of weekends ago. And I couldn't believe watching you, not just like walk around, but like get up on stage, dance a little bit. I'm like, this girl, your body is healing so nicely. You know, I mean, I was 21 days, like 3 weeks solid. My drains didn't come out till 15 days. So like I was like not walking for the first 3 weeks more than 60 seconds a day, which was basically going to the bathroom, you know, and everybody's experience is different. And yours was not like mine, even though, like you said, the post removal is no joke and the healing process is much longer. Your recovery on the immediate was very different than mine, you know? Mm-hmm. And so it's amazing just to see how it's all unique to each of us. And I'm so proud of you for listening to that voice in your head, because we also shared some voice notes back and forth about that, with the hesitation of, you know, do I wait after conference? You know, was part of the thought, you know, do you wait? And I'm just proud of you for following your intuition And I think there will come a day where you're going to look back on the summer and go, holy shit, thank God. I literally thank God that I listened to the voice.
Yeah.
Right.
Your help was life-saving, and same like you. I've been getting a lot of DMs, and happy to help anyone that's going through it, because so many women helped me. And I met a ton of women that had explanted. Everyone was super generous with their information and with their help. And what's funny about that voice is, what are they threatening right now? Like, they're already like threatening masks, and I don't know if we'll ever repeat what we just did, but it's a very real risk. Like, I think that's what was playing in my head. What if I couldn't get into the hospital? Because I have another friend whose breast implants ruptured during COVID. Right. And she had to live with a ruptured implant for 6 months. They wouldn't let her do that surgery.
That's insane.
Yep.
Wow. Like, how more sick, like, she is because of that. And, you know, you can only hope and pray that it'll be reversible, because like, it's insane. Really, really crazy. So you just brought up a good point. Don't know what's going to happen in the future. None of us do. But I always, similar to you, actually, I had my moment in 2021 where I was like you, I was like really in it. And for those who know me, know that I am a freedom warrior. It's always been my thing, you know, fighting exploitation, fighting against, like, for human rights. And so when COVID came along, we just added on top of that, like, freedom of speech. Okay. Yep. Body autonomy. Okay. Yep. Freedom of mobility. Yep. Like, stacking. You know, and there comes a point where you do recognize we all have a different calling, and mine is definitely different than yours. And I will still be always advocating for what I have been, but the responsibility is different. It's not my responsibility to wake people up. It's not my responsibility. And I'm not, like I always say, like, I'm not God. God is in the life-changing miracle business. That's not my job. My job is just to be love and light. And as best as I understand the truth, to convey that through love and light, and stepping back into purpose-driven work. And that is what you're doing now. At the same time, I also make sure that I have my, like, selective of, like, where I tune in for information, and I pay attention so that I can see what's coming, you know, and being prepared for that. And so me personally, I think it's a matter of when versus if we'll be in another lockdown, if we'll have another pandemic, if things are going to get worse. And paying attention to somebody like Bill Gates, who talks about the next pandemics, plural, right? So that in mind, we don't know what it's going to hold, but wanting to fortify our futures as much as possible. We started talking about money at the beginning of our conversation. I'd love to bring that kind of into our, like, closure around providing people maybe with some food for thought or money for thought if they've not been thinking about how to bulletproof, how to fortify their finances. Because again, as we chatted earlier, it doesn't matter what side of the fence you might be on or what your outtake is on the world. We can all see that fiat, which is cash currency money, is crumbling. And what are you doing right now with cash?
I'll start with something mindset, and then I'm going to go into something really practical that I'm doing. The first step is in living in what's possible instead of this is happening. Just like you said, like, if I like to look at everything that's happening in the world and get my bearings and say, is it possible that this is happening? Which allows me to look at the bad stuff, but as well as the good stuff. And that's a better place to live in, because you're not going to be able to create and do the work that you need to do or have any motivation if you think we're screwed. You won't be able to operate from the place. So, you know, at some point I had to decide that my life is going to be long and beautiful no matter what. I had to make that decision even when I didn't feel like it, because this stuff is work, right? So I had to shift my mindset around that. So I'll say that first. Two, I do multiple things. I have multiple streams of revenue. So I make money in a few different ways. I have a network marketing business. I have a coaching business. I have affiliate partnerships. I have real estate. We're invested in some tech companies. I'm invested in really nothing to do with the bank. We don't have mutual funds or RSP. I don't want any of my money in the bank. I don't trust a financial advisor's advice at all unless they're very, very awake. I would talk to those people, talk to the people. I love the people that are traditionally trained in the system, but are awake. They're great to talk to. Talk to those people. And I do it all. I have a little bit of crypto. I have these different investments, but I personally like tangible things. I find that sometimes like Bitcoin people are absolutists. They're like, only this thing. I personally am very distrustful of anyone that tells me that they have the one and only solution in this world. I am very distrustful of that because I don't like to think like I know everything or that I have a crystal ball.
Sure.
So I like lots of different solutions. So crypto is one. I love real estate. We have lots of rental properties, and gold and silver for me is such a no-brainer investment. It's a thing. It's a tangible thing that is worth money. It's needed for every single technological upgrade that they want to do right now. It's in dentistry, it's in cars. It's such a finite resource, and it's in absolutely everything. It's in your cell phone. Yeah, and they're going to need more and more. So silver and gold, other metals as well, because cash isn't going to exist very much longer. So I want to have actual things. I don't want things that are valuable because someone told me that they're valuable. I want an actual substance that is because it's worth something in and of itself.
Totally. Well, I love everything actually that you just shared and don't disagree. I think the principle that I always tell people is you want diversification. And that's exactly what you've explained, right? You don't want to be relying on just one avenue, because if that one thing is not performing, at least your portfolio is diversified, that you have other areas to be able to rely on. And I also think it's important that crypto, and still I'm speaking about myself when I say this, is really hard to understand for a lot of people. Like I still feel like I'm learning more Chinese. Like I've got like a good baseline, but I'm always like, okay, I got to go for more Bitcoin, cryptocurrency language lessons, because it's a whole new world. And so things like gold and silver that are tangible, things like real estate that are tangible, that you also may be able to understand better, are a fantastic asset to be putting into your portfolio as an asset base. The other thing, like I explain to people a lot, and I don't know, if you share the same viewpoint, but precious metals, buying things like gold and silver, and I say buying gold and silver as opposed to investing in gold and silver, because you're really purchasing an insurance policy. Gold and silver is always going to fluctuate based on what fiat currency is doing. And there could come a time, as you pointed out, that cash could be no longer. And gold, silver should go really high, which means, at least for you, you've purchased an insurance policy that's not paper. Because if you have insurance policies right now, life insurance, term insurance, there's all kinds of different policies that should cash out. I don't think they're going to be coming and going, oh, Shay, thanks so much that you bought your life insurance policy or this critical illness term policy that like you've paid into for all of these years, and here's the cash for it, or here's the money for it, right? this is something physical. I normally actually have my ring on, but I'm still in my workout clothes. So I don't have my ring on, but I have my gold bracelet here, one of them. And that's the real deal, 24 karat gold, that if that were to wipe out, at least I have gold and silver. And you kind of go, I hope that I never need to use it, because then we know we're in a bit of trouble if we need to use it. But if you do, you're prepared. And you've been, like I said, you've taken out an insurance policy basically on your cash, right?
I mean, in a world that is obsessed with talking about privilege, there's a lot of people that have Western privilege. And I mean, they don't think anything bad would ever happen in Canada. And there's a lot of people getting very bad information right now. My parents are not awake, and my dad was talking about his pension plan, and they just have a pension plan and RSPs, and he thinks that that's safe. And I was trying to tell him about bail-ins. I was trying to tell him about bricks, CBDCs. Like, there's nothing that can rattle him, so I just have to leave him. But these things are really real. People have no idea that their money could disappear. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it could. It absolutely could. And my big awakening to the money thing was probably working for the Trucking for Freedom documentary when they started freezing assets and bank accounts. There's still many people that are debanked right now. I could have easily had my assets frozen. So any money that's actually in the bank is technically vulnerable. Even safe deposit boxes, those aren't safe. They can confiscate those just as easily as they can confiscate money in the bank.
Really, really good point. And I'll just share too, like, there are great third-party vaults that you can store your precious metals in. I have two myself that I store my gold and silver, and some of it I also keep on hand. I don't keep a lot, so don't try to come rob me, because most of it's in the vault. That's always like the concern when you're talking on a podcast about this stuff. It's like, well, where do you keep it? It's like, not, and it's definitely not between the mattress. If you come into my house, I'll tell you it's not there. So,
surrounded by sharks and a moat and right.
Exactly. Exactly. But I think you bring up a good point that it's like, and if you are holding gold and silver, like, don't put it in a bank, put it in a third party secured vault, for that reason. And this is actually another area that Karla and I have also found commonality and common ground, and are actually working to help people find their way into a trusted source to gain access to gold and silver. When I first started talking more about this, as I was seeing the economy really shift, and even just like the talks, like you mentioned about the BRICS nations. And I'm like, wow, like, people need to be waking up to like, what is going on here? My DM started filling up going, I don't know where to get it. I don't know who to trust. And the third setback that I commonly see is they don't meet the minimum purchase requirements in order to gain gold and silver. There's many companies I shouldn't say many, but there's a handful of good companies in Canada that you have to have minimum $5,000 or $10,000 in order to get gold and silver. And a lot of people don't just have that sitting aside for a rainy day. And so I'd love to just extend that as an invitation. If you're listening to this right now and it's landing with you, it's resonating, and you're like, I only have $10 or I only have $100, but how can I get in? I'm going to put a link in the show notes. You can connect with me on that, which is also Karla. Like I said, we're working together on this, but we would love to have a bigger conversation with you so that you can start just doing what you can with some extra funds that you might have. And maybe if you are saying, I don't have extra funds, we can always find ways, like cutting out the Starbucks every day or 3 times a week, or cutting back on Netflix, whatever it is. There's always a way, right? When you make it a priority, you can find the funds, you can find the resources. And it's really, really important in the times that we're in right now to be taking those measures so that you are fortified, You have that insurance policy. And if you need it, you're not scrambling. You're in a position of empowerment.
That's why I feel so good sharing about that system, because there's no gatekeepers. Anyone can start saving. And I want to stress that it is important to take action, especially if this conversation is scary, because when it's scary and we think, oh, I don't have a lot of extra money to work with, then people make the conscious decision just not to think about it at all and just cross their fingers and hope that nothing bad happens. But I would offer, if this is a scary conversation, then you need to be taking action sooner than later, because you can start saving, again, like $10 in your pocket. You can start there and start building. You can start building and you can start saving, and it'll start building. But you got to take action sooner than later, so that if something does happen in the future, you've already been doing it for a while. It's like one of my teachers always says, you don't want to learn how to swim when you're drowning in the ocean. Like, don't wait for things to get bad. Start now while it's not so crazy. And it's a safe investment. You don't need $20,000 to buy a Bitcoin. It's not a woo-woo thing, right? It's just a physical product that historically has always been really safe.
Yes, I love it. Karla, I mean, we could go Joe Rogan. I know you and I could definitely stay on for like a solid 3 hours. I feel like we're just getting started. I'm like, okay. I just want to thank you though for coming on. There's so much goodness, so much value. And as the Sovereign CEO on the Freedom CEO podcast, I want to ask you, when you think about being the CEO of your life, how has taking ownership over your decisions brought you freedom?
I mean, it's everything. It's radical personal responsibility. It's the only way through all this, getting out of complaint and choosing what we're committed to instead. Like, what solutions are we committed to? Because no matter what position you're in, your life ultimately is up to you. Your freedom is up to you. And thank goodness there are solutions. They might not be easy, they might not be simple, but there are solutions. And if we're focused on that mindset that it's up to me, it's only up to me, that can be the scariest thing that you've ever heard, or the most empowering, because that means you're also the only thing in your way.
I love it. I love that. Such a great way to end off. Thank you, Karla, for being here. And so nice to catch up with you today on the podcast.
Thank you, Shay. Anytime. So thanks for having me on here.
How many gold nuggets did you just get out of today's show? But like literally actual gold. Listen, I believe strongly that more money needs to move through the hands of women. Women need to have a foundational understanding of their finances, the language of money, how to make money work for them, and how to become an investor rather than a spender, or a saver for that matter. Saving your money is costing you more than you think. I invite you to come join us inside the Freedom CEO Society. Right now, we're moving through an incredible mastermind called Made for More, with 8 freedom foundational fundamentals that you need in order to create more freedom in your finances, wealth, and your life. Check out thefreedomceo.com to get started. And if you're like, Shay, just give me the gold, then head over to shayandco.com/gold. Until next time, friends, stay free and wealthy. Thanks for tuning into the Freedom CEO podcast. If you got value out of today's show, I would love for you to leave a review, as it will help my show reach other people as well. You know what to do. Download this episode, click the like and subscribe button. If you feel like spreading more love, hop over to Instagram and share today's show in your stories. Remember to tag Shane Vidiata and the Freedom CEO. My DMs are always open, so drop me a line. I'd love to connect. Until next time, keep owning your decisions to live a life of freedom. Live a life you love.